Hi guys, welcome to our next installment of Make Up Your Career, where I do my makeup and give you some career tips. Today we're going to be talking about my favorite topic, which is money. And I know this is going to be really surprising for people because I just have like that look and that sound, but I actually don't come from money. I am a first generation college student. Shout out to the CARE program at Florida State. If it wasn't for them, I couldn't have got through it. The CARE program is specifically for students who are first generation and low income. So you had to be first generation first, meaning no one in your family could have gone to college or graduated from college. And second, you had to be low income. And thankfully, I was both. My dad was from Cuba. My mom's parents are from Puerto Rico. And as someone who had 3 sisters growing up, not making that much money, how did I get to the place where I'm at now? To not only make more money, but to be smart with my money. And I would be flat out 100% lying if I made it seem like this was something that came easy to me. This is actually a conversation I just had with a client a couple weeks ago. Is I did not start investing in my 401k until I was 28 years old. I didn't even know what that was. It didn't seem like real money to me. And it seemed like my real money was going somewhere I couldn't see it or use it, and I did not want that. So let's discuss like the salary transparency piece, and then we can kind of go into at what point did I start being smart about my money. My first job out of college was working at a janitorial services company. And I was definitely a very hard worker, like in my early days. I was working full-time at this janitorial services company, and then part-time I was working at Sephora, and I loved it. I loved working at Sephora so much, but I knew I couldn't pay like my student loans back with that Sephora money, so I just did it part-time. And I would leave my job at 5 p.m., get into my Sephora clothes, and go straight to Sephora from 6 to 9 or 6 to like 10 if I was closing. My first job out of college paid me $12.50 an hour, and I was there for about a year. I had gotten promoted and changed teams, but like genuinely could do this job in my sleep. I was probably working 10 hours a week and then watching Netflix the rest of the time. And I even told my boss like, hey, like this is just not enough work for me. So they gave me more work. It still wasn't enough. So in the talks of me getting another promotion, my boyfriend at the time, who was absolutely awful, but I owe him so much for this, he was interviewing at a staffing agency called Insight Global, and he referred me for the job, and he didn't get it, but I did. And it was one of those staffing agencies where you just had to be like young and pretty. They got people right out of college. And my base salary was $31,000 a year, and you don't get commission until you're there for, I believe, 6 months. So for 6 months, I was working like 50 to 60 hours a week because it was a sales position. So 50 to 60 hours a week because you have to prove that you're worthy of getting promoted for $31,000 a year. It was insane. I couldn't believe it. We would come on the weekends and everything. You started with like a cohort, and me and these people in this cohort still keep in touch because we can't believe we like allowed ourselves to be hazed like that. This is when I found out that staffing and recruiting was a multi-billion-dollar industry that most people just slept on. I didn't know what recruiting was. I didn't know, I didn't really know anything about HR. So when I got the job and I learned everything about recruiting, I realized I liked the people aspect more than the sales aspect, because there were people most of the people in that office were making 6 figures, and there was one who was making almost $400,000 a year, which I thought was so insane. I didn't want to be a salesperson. I'm not a good salesperson. So if someone says no to me, I'm like, okay, moving on to the next. I knew a staffing agency wasn't where I belonged. It wasn't my ministry. So I ended up leaving after about 6 months because I got passed over for a promotion. And I just quit without any job lined up. And then thankfully I got a corporate recruiter job a few weeks later. That was very silly. Don't do that, especially because I had rent to pay. Like I was living on my own. So then I started my corporate recruiter career, and I was working at this law firm. It's the biggest law firm in the world. And I started their corporate recruiting function. Me and someone who's a lot more experienced than I am. His name is Dennis. Shout out to Dennis because he does watch my TikToks and he does watch me on Instagram. Thank you so much for all the things that you taught me. I did end up being there for about a year. I got my mom a job there. And then after she started, I gave my notice because I got the staffing agency that I actually started with. They reached out to me for a contract position for one of their clients that I had worked with before. And I was like, yeah, that sounds good, because it was like $20,000 more. At the corporate recruiter position, I was making $45,000. So this was about $33 an hour, I believe. And so I was like, hell yeah, that's like so much money. I can't wait. And so I took the job. I actually really, really enjoyed this job. I think out of all the jobs, this is definitely one of my favorites, because it was just like super chill, like very laid back. My manager was amazing. I leave that job for a position paying about $60K, and it was a contract position, and the company that I was at ended up getting bought by another company, and so I did not want to stay there to get laid off. So the staffing agency, Insight Global, they got me another contract position at this company, CAE, which I really, really enjoyed working there. It was like my first, I feel like this is like the first time I had been treated like a grown-up in my career, and to like be creative and be a problem solver. And I was able to experience like working inside like HR, which recruiting is usually separate from HR. So this was like the first position where I was working like directly with HR, inside HR, like I worked in the HR department and everything. Left the job as a contractor to go to another position for $80K, and I was just like, oh my God, like this is so much money. I was so happy. And the position that I signed up for, like honestly, they were just overpaying me, because I was hiring electricians. I was supposed to be hiring engineers, and I was hiring electricians. And then one time, one of the electricians added me on Snapchat, and I was just like, no, I don't want this job. They were always hitting on me. They were so inappropriate. The CFO of the company was super inappropriate all the time. And I was just like, I don't want to work in this type of environment where like I just felt like uncomfortable working there. So I quit after a few months. They were so angry, but I quit for a job that paid $20,000 less, for like $65,000. For the staffing agency, they had another contract position. So I left it and took that position. This was the craziest, like definitely the craziest pay decrease I've ever had in my whole life, but it really paid off in the long run, because that job is what got me noticed by Microsoft, which I ended up taking that position for about 98 base salaries. So my salary in like 5 years like quadrupled, or more than that, I don't even know. Started working in big tech. So at that point, like total comp, I think my salary was 110, and then it went to 120, 130, and then I left there, Microsoft, to go to Meta. It was a total comp of 190,000. I feel like all of y'all have seen that. How much money I've been making has made the rounds of every news station and news publication out there. I think mostly people are just surprised that that's how much recruiters make. I was making 190 there, and then I left there to go to LinkedIn, and I was making about 170 total comp. I think my base salary was like 140 or something like that. I took another pay cut, but also both decisions were really good for my career, because at that point at LinkedIn, I had a lot more freedom there, and I was able to work a lot more in my business. I was making so much in my business that I decided to do this full time. So now you know my salary journey, and it's not always like clean cut for people. It's not like always this steady incline. Sometimes you do take a pay cut, and sometimes that's a good decision, sometimes it's a bad decision. To show you how little I knew about money and finances, when I was negotiating my salary at Microsoft, which by the way was the first time I ever negotiated salary, they offered me on hire stock, and it was, let's say $10,000. I feel like that's what I remember. And I was just like, well, instead of on hire stock, can you just give me that money in like cash? Like, can I just get a cash bonus, like a sign-on bonus? And they were like, well, we're not gonna give that to you instead of, but we can give you an additional. So they gave me like a 5K sign-on bonus, and I thought that was just so crazy. I was like, oh my God, like, what is this? Because I didn't realize stock was real money. I had no idea how stock worked, and I didn't want to sound like an idiot. So I didn't tell my recruiter. I had no idea what that was. And now with my clients, I always say like one of the parts of the service that I really enjoy is like the benefits analysis, and just explaining to you your offer in the way that I wish somebody would have explained to me, because a lot of times recruiters just assume that you know how it all works. But even I myself was a recruiter, and I didn't know how it all worked, and no one really sat me down and was like, do you need help? Like, can I explain this for you? Do you understand what on hire stock is? Do you understand what an ESPP is? I didn't know what any of that was, but I didn't want to sound dumb when I talked to recruiters. So when they did finally explain it to me, it was because I was already an employee, and I needed to understand how it worked to talk to people about it, but I had no idea. And I think also a lot of recruiters who are extending these offers probably don't have the biggest idea either. So they don't explain it in full detail because sometimes they don't know. But I just try to like decode things with my clients so they understand what's real money, what's not real money, because I feel like no one really explained that to me.